Okay, so I'm Alice, and I'm an archaeologist. And when Columbus arrived in the Caribbean in 1492, there were millions of people already there. And my research focuses on their settlements and houses in the 1,000 years preceding European colonisation.
I'm Kate, and I'm an engineer, and I worked in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, which was when Alice and I started talking about shelter after disasters. And for us, our oldest historic document was by Fred Cooney from 1982. I've been involved in the international humanitarian shelter sector since '99, and after being part of CARE Haiti's team, transitional shelter kit team in Port-au-Prince, I got stuck on the idea of our mantra that shelter is a process and not a product, and the different ways that we conceptualise, which you now can't see, that shelter process after disasters, and that's where we started.
And this is just a map of where, so Kate and I worked, a map of the Caribbean, and this is just to say that the Caribbean has a maritime climate and a lot of environmental hazards such as hurricanes and earthquakes, etc. And I did a survey of about 150 domestic structures across 10 islands, and they had a lot in common. So up until this point, archaeologists had looked at sort of houses or on a site-by-site basis and not had the data to compare. And so I basically did a comparison in terms of settlement preferences and some of the technological and architectural characteristics, and I found that they coalesced into what I call a Caribbean architectural mode, and I'm going to show you some of those characteristics. So the houses share the same sort of footprint, circular post and thatch built houses. And one of the consistent features of these houses is their monumental facades. Okay, so they have reinforced sort of entrances. And here we see the front third, and this is the doorway. The front third of these houses are reinforced and much sort of larger and more monumental than the back portion of the houses, using sort of bigger posts. And the two entrance posts of the doorway are some of the biggest in the whole building. So house fronts were probably elaborated through painting or carving, and would have sort of given a house its own particular identity. Another feature is that the post holes, and you can see here holes dug into bedrock, for the foundations of the houses were often dug into not sand or earth, but people specifically chose rock to dig their post holes into, using technology they had, which would be sticks or coral or stone and not metal, and it was all done by hand. A lot of these houses have a high or steep roof pitch, and we can tell that because the posts are set into slanting post holes, so you can calculate roof pitch, and this allows effective water runoff, but also means that people could place, and we know this from historic documents, place household deities on top of their houses, so height was an important feature. Houses also show sort of prolongation of their lives through rebuilding and repair, and we can see this in the doubling and replacement of post holes in these house plans here that you can see here. So, although existing foundations were almost certainly reused for the replacement of timbers, under certain circumstances, people explicitly opted to dig new post holes in the bedrock rather than just use the same ones again and again and again, which they could have done. And this is illustrated in this plan here, where you can see rebuilding in the same spot. So structures of the same colour represent repeated rebuilding over generations. And radiocarbon dates have shown that some of these house trajectories last up to 500 years. So people rebuilding in the same spot, but moving their houses sort of slightly over 500 years. And if you look at the house life cycle, we see that when a decision was made to dismantle the house, it was ritually closed, and people placed items, their personal possessions, in the post holes, closed up the post holes, took the usable timbers and built a house by making holes in the bedrock right next door. Okay.
And so meanwhile, so I was thinking, so what's the difference here between Alice's mode and my process? And because the mode seems to have kind of bits of product, details and features. And I think you saw one of the differences that people had agency. The features were spread over a vast region, a long period of time over which there were frequent storms and slower environmental changes took place. And people made kind of rare changes to the fundamental mode, but more frequent and more weird changes in an everyday way. That picture you just saw was housing in Haiti in 2008, and this was at the end of January 2011. You can see the choices about where to live, what to build, how to build are not immediately obvious from these photos, but there do seem to be some shared features about those dwellings, which are not shared with this, which was by and large the dominant shelter response of a transitional shelter kit, which looked like that. And we, in the shelter sector, like these archaeologists, we are preoccupied with the details of the single shelter object. But for us, it's more about the individual shelters and a uniform designed type of shelter. And this was the standardised footprint of those shelters, about 20 metres squared. As I said, uniform, one design, a supply chain based on kind of partial prefabrication and on-site assembly, depending on the space and tenure arrangements. In our case, the foundations were intended to be demountable so that those shelters could theoretically be moved. They used a hooked metal strip sunk into a hole backfilled with concrete, and those lumps of concrete are designed to hold the shelter down and resist uplift, the sucking force generated by hurricanes. Interestingly, if you work out the weight of that concrete, it's about the same as the weight of a mahogany shaft or post in one of those holes, by coincidence. This is an example 18 months later of what one family did to incrementally upgrade their transitional shelter kit. The choices about when and how to do this depend on money, materials lying around, scope for attaching things to that. Still doesn't look much like the housing that was there in 2008. Lots of people didn't do anything. So zooming out to the hillside, you can see these shelters perched among houses on platforms and behind improvised retaining walls made of bed frames and stones and stuff that repeat and occur across the city. And you can see immediately why there's this like real and live tussle at the moment between the drive to import fast but alien solutions and calls to commit resources that enable messier alternatives at self-recovery and repair. So what is missing from this conceptualisation? Well, the idea of a mode allows, what it allows is that the details are considered, we think about that, but across many buildings and many places. This allows the idea, this challenges the kind of preconceptions about how often and for what reasons people make changes, and it allows for the idea of people sharing ideas and technology across time between people, that this constitutes and catalyses wider processes and scales and trajectories of change that are in train before and continue after humanitarian history begins at the moment of disaster. There we go.